I'm Theron Q. Ramanchiraka. Elsewhere in my channel here, I have provided several sources of information about the astral plane written by William Walker Atkinson in both his arcane teachings and his book called The Astral World, which he wrote under his pen name Swami Panchadasi. Now, in those, as well as I believe in a few other of my videos, I have referred to what are known as thought forms. So I thought that insofar as thought forms are sometimes referred to as astral entities that are called artificial entities by William Walker Atkinson, insofar as they are not naturally created, they're not part of they're not a natural creation. They are created by humans. They are the thing side of thoughts, and they can have enormous power. They can be affected by other people than those who created them, but more so affected by the people who created them. And we all create them at times. Not every thought, according to some points of view about them, not every thought creates a thought form, but they also, thought forms, they're not only affected by the people who created them, but they also have effects on people, and they are an entity of themselves, of their own, and they can be very powerful. And it's important to know about them because we're all involved with them somehow. We all are. They are unseen by the physical senses, and they can be vitalized, as a matter of fact, to take on a more definite life of their own, and can act independently of the person who created them. And they can last for a very long time, centuries. As a matter of fact, they can become very powerful, and they take on a life of their own. They become an entity, although what's called an artificial one, because they are human created rather than an actual creation aside from us creating them, right? So, but they are an entity, and they can become vitalized, like I said, and take on a true life of their own, and can last for a very long time and have powerful impact on humanity. And one thing that's important to know about them is that we can create them intentionally to do good things. We can also create them to do destructive things. And so they are an entity that can be considered safe to deal with. They're not the kind of entity that we would normally think of when we think of evoking or invoking entities from the astral plane. That gets into some dangerous territory doing that. But when we're dealing with thought forms, it's very important to know about them so that we can both protect ourselves from dangerous thought forms as well as create constructive ones, not just for our own lives, the creator of the thought forms, that person, but for other people as well, and for humanity as a whole. So I thought here, I'm going to go ahead and give more information about thought forms, and I'm going to narrate a book for you. It's a book called Thought Forms. And it was written in 1905, by two people collaboratively, Dr. Annie Besant and Mr. C.W. Leadbeater. 1905, and I believe it might have been published somewhere in India. I'm not sure. I can find out, but that's not the big deal. 1905, Dr. Annie Besant and Mr. C.W. Leadbeater. Thought Forms. Here we go. As knowledge increases, The attitude of science towards the things of the invisible world is undergoing considerable modification. Recall, 1905. Its attention is no longer directed solely to the earth, with all its variety of objects, or to the physical world around it, but it finds itself compelled to glance further afield and to construct hypotheses as to the nature of the matter and force which lie in the regions beyond the ken of its instruments. Ether is now comfortably settled in the scientific kingdom, becoming almost more than a hypothesis. Mesmerism, under its new name of hypnotism, is no longer an outcast. Reichenbach's experiments are still looked at askance, but are not wholly condemned. Röntgen's rays have rearranged some of the older ideas of matter, while radium has revolutionized them and is leading science beyond the borderland of ether into the astral world. The boundaries between animate and inanimate matter are broken down. Magnets are found to be possessed of almost uncanny powers, transferring certain forms of disease in a way not yet satisfactorily explained. Telepathy, clairvoyance, movement without contact, though not yet admitted to the scientific table, are approaching the Cinderella stage. The fact is that science has pressed its researches so far, has used such rare ingenuity in its questionings of nature, has shown such tireless patience in its investigations, that it is receiving the reward of those who seek, and forces and beings of the next higher plane of nature are beginning to show themselves on the outer edge of the physical field. Nature makes no leaps, and as the physicist nears the confines of his kingdom, he finds himself bewildered by touches and gleams from another realm which interpenetrates his own. He finds himself compelled to speculate on invisible presences, if only to find a rational explanation for undoubted physical phenomena. And insensibly, he slips over the boundary and is, although he does not yet realize it, contacting the astral plane. One of the most interesting of the high roads from the physical to the astral is that of the study of thought. The Western scientist, commencing in the anatomy and physiology of the brain, endeavors to make these a basis for a sound psychology. He passes then into the region of dreams, illusions, and hallucinations. And as soon as he endeavors to elaborate an experimental science which shall classify and arrange these, he inevitably plunges into the astral plane. Dr. Baraduc of Paris has nearly crossed the barrier and is well on the way towards photographing astro-mental images, to obtaining pictures of what, from the materialistic standpoint, would be the results of vibrations in the gray matter of the brain. It has long been known to those who have given attention to the questions that impressions were produced by the reflection of the ultraviolet rays from objects not visible by the rays of the ordinary spectrum. Clairvoyants were occasionally justified by the appearance on sensitive photographic plates of figures seen and described by them as present with the sitter, though invisible to physical sight. It is not possible for an unbiased judgment to reflect in toto the evidence of such occurrences proffered by men of integrity on the strength of their own experiments, oftentimes repeated. And now we have investigators who turn their attention to the obtaining of images of subtle forms, inventing methods specially designed with the view of reproducing them. Among these, Dr. Baraduc seems to have been the most successful, and he has published a volume dealing with his investigations and containing reproductions of the photographs he has obtained. Dr. Baraduc states that he is investigating the subtle forces by which the soul, defined as the intelligence working between the body and the spirit, expresses itself by seeking to record its movements by means of a needle, its luminous but invisible vibrations by impressions on sensitive plates. He shuts out by non-conductors electricity and heat. We can pass over his experiments in biometry or measurement of life by movements, and glance at those in iconography, the impressions of invisible waves, regarded by him as of the nature of light, in which the soul draws its own image. A number of these photographs represent etheric and magnetic results of physical phenomena, and these again we may pass over as not bearing on our special subject, interesting as they are in themselves. Dr. Baraduc obtained various impressions by strongly thinking of an object, the effect produced by the thought form appearing on a sensitive plate. Thus he tried to project a portrait of a lady who was then dead, whom he had known, and produced an impression due to his thought of a drawing he had made of her on her deathbed. He quite rightly says that the creation of an object is the passing out of an image from the mind and its subsequent materialization, and he seeks the chemical effect caused on silver salts by his thought-created picture. One striking illustration is that of a force raying outwards, the projection of an earnest prayer. Another prayer is seen producing forms like the fronds of a fern, another like rain pouring upwards, if the phrase may be permitted. A rippled oblong mass is projected by three persons thinking of their unity in affection. A young boy sorrowing over and caressing a dead bird is surrounded by a flood of curved interwoven threads of emotional disturbance. A strong vortex is formed by a feeling of deep sadness. Looking at this most interesting and suggestive series, it is clear that in these pictures, that which is obtained is not the thought image, but the effect caused in etheric matter by its vibrations. And it is necessary to clairvoyantly see the thought in order to understand the results produced. In fact, the illustrations are instructive for what they do not show directly, as well as for the images that appear. It may be useful to put before students a little more plainly than has hitherto been done some of the facts in nature which will render more intelligible the results at which Dr. Baraduc is arriving. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I've been outside doing snow removal for many hours on end with salt on my hands, and that salt that we spread to melt ice, if it gets on your face, it dries it out really badly. And right now, you might be able to see my eyes are watery, my face looks shiny. It's very, excuse me. But that doesn't stop me from doing this. No. Necessarily imperfect, these must be. A physical photographic camera and sensitive plates not being ideal instruments for astral research, but as will be seen from the above, they are most interesting and valuable as forming a link between clairvoyant and physical scientific investigations. At the present time, observers outside what is known as the Theosophical Society are concerning themselves with the fact that emotional changes show their nature by changes of color in the cloud-like ovoid or aura that encompasses all living beings. Articles on the subject are appearing in papers unconnected with the Theosophical Society back in 1905, and a medical specialist, a Dr. Hooker in London, has collected a large number of cases in which the color of the aura of persons of various types and temperaments is recorded by him. His results resemble closely those arrived at by clairvoyants and others, and the general unanimity on the subject is sufficient to establish the fact, if the evidence be judged by the usual canons applied to human testimony. The difficulty of representation. We've often heard it said that thoughts are things. And there are many among us who are persuaded of the truth of this statement. Excuse me. Yet very few of us have any clear idea as to what kind of a thing a thought is. And the object of this little book here is to help us to conceive this. There are some serious difficulties in our way, for our conception of space is limited to 3 dimensions. And when we attempt to make a drawing, we practically limit ourselves to 2. In reality, the presentation even of ordinary 3-dimensional objects is seriously defective, for scarcely a line or angle in our drawing is accurately shown. If a road crosses the picture, the part in the foreground must be represented as enormously wider than that in the background, although in reality the width is unchanged. If a house is to be drawn, the right angles at its corners must be shown as acute or obtuse as the case may be, but hardly ever as they actually are. In fact, we draw everything not as it is, but as it appears. And the effort of the artist is by a skillful arrangement of lines upon a flat surface to convey to the eye an impression which shall recall that made by a 3-dimensional object. It is possible to do this only because similar objects are already familiar to those who look at the picture and accept the suggestion which it conveys. A person who has never seen a tree could form but little idea of one from even the most skillful painting. If to this difficulty we add the other and far more serious one of a limitation of consciousness, and suppose ourselves to be showing the picture to a being who knew only 2 dimensions, we see how utterly impossible it would be to convey to him any adequate impression of such a landscape as we see. Precisely this difficulty, in its most aggravated form, stands in our way when we try to make a drawing of even a very simple thought form. The vast majority of those who look at the picture are absolutely limited to the consciousness of 3 dimensions, and furthermore, have not the slightest conception of that inner world to which thought forms belong, with all its splendid light and color. All that we can do at the best is to represent a section of the thought form, and those whose faculties enable them to see the original cannot but be disappointed with any reproduction of it. Still, those who are at present unable to see anything will gain at least a partial comprehension, and however inadequate it may be, it is at least better than nothing. All students know that what is called the aura of man is the outer part of the cloud-like substance of its higher bodies, interpenetrating each other and extending beyond the confines of his physical body, the smallest of all. They know also that 2 of these bodies, the mental and the desire bodies, are those chiefly concerned with the appearance of what are called thought forms. But in order that the matter may be made clear for all, and not only for students already acquainted with theosophical teachings, for example, a recapitulation of the main facts will not be out of place. Man, the thinker, is clothed in a body composed of innumerable combinations of the subtle matter of the mental plane. This body being more or less refined in its constituents and organized more or less fully for its functions, according to the stage of intellectual development at which the man himself has arrived. A mental body is an object of great beauty, the delicacy and rapid motion of its particles giving it an aspect of living iridescent light. And this beauty becomes an extraordinarily radiant and entrancing loveliness as the intellect becomes more highly evolved and is employed chiefly on pure and sublime topics. Every thought gives rise to a set of correlated vibrations in the matter of this body, accompanied with a marvelous play of color, like that in the spray of a waterfall as the sunlight strikes it, raised to the nth degree of color and vivid delicacy. The body under this impulse throws off a vibrating portion of itself, shaped by the nature of the vibrations, as figures are made by sand on a disc vibrating to a musical note. And this gathers from the surrounding atmosphere matter like itself, in fineness, from the elemental essence of the mental world. We have then a thought form, pure and simple. And it is a living entity of intense activity animated by the one idea that generated it. If made of the finer kinds of matter, it will be of great power and energy, and may be used as a most potent agent when directed by a strong and steady will. I want to point out right now, in other of my videos, some of the ones that don't get much viewing by people, I point out the importance of learning and using methods, techniques to increase one's use of the power of will, and in the direction of increasing, fine-tuning, sharpening control over attention, as well as mental imagery. I noticed that some of this material that I have posted here lately, in which I mention this, and I give some methods that, as a secondary result of some techniques that I give, increases these capacities. Here is a statement right here that gives us a really good reason to increase these faculties, these mental faculties. Specifically here it mentions directed by a strong and steady will. And of course, this automatically involves focus of thought. The ability to do that is attention. Attention to a specific thought. Control of attention so that there is concentration on one specific thought to the exclusion of others. It takes a strong and steady will to do that. Into the details of such use we will enter later. When the man's energy flows outwards towards external objects of desire or is occupied in passional and emotional activities, this energy works in a less subtle order of matter than the mental, in that of the astral world. What is called his desire body is composed of this matter, and it forms the most prominent part of the aura in the undeveloped person. Where the person is of a gross type, the desire body is of the denser matter of the astral plane and is dull in hue, browns and dirty greens and reds playing a great part in it. Through this will flash various characteristic colors as his passions are excited. A man of a higher type has his desire body composed of the finer qualities of astral matter. This is giving a different point of view about the astral world than was given already elsewhere on my channel here already in the works of William Walker Atkinson. This, of course, is coming more at it from the point of view of getting to thought forms and talking about the astral body more so than the astral plane, and also talking about the mental body. But mind you, there's nothing inconsistent here with what I've already provided on my channel. Different points of view, different subjects under consideration. Man of a higher type has his desire body composed of the finer qualities of astral matter. with the colors rippling over and flashing through it, fine and clear in hue. While less delicate and less radiant than the mental body, you see, it forms a beautiful object in these cases. And as selfishness is eliminated, all the duller and heavier shades disappear. This desire or astral body gives rise to a second class of entities, similar in their general constitution to the thought forms already described, but limited to the astral plane and generated by the mind under the dominion of the animal nature. These are caused by the activity of the lower mind throwing itself out through the astral body. The activity of what is called kama manas in theosophical terminology, rooted in Indian terminology, which means the mind dominated by desire, kama manas. Vibrations in the body of desire, or astral body. By the way, kama manas, this kind of terminology we may say is, well, listen. William Walker Atkinson, what book is it? Somewhere in the astral, either in the astral world or the arcane teachings, refers to, I'm just trying to remember what book it is. Well, he says that yeah, I'm not sure which of it is, but he points out that terminology, Western terminology that has to do with this more occult side of talk, we largely root it in Greek terminology. Like the term astral and the divisions of the astral plane. I think this is what he's referring to when he says, when he points this out. He says that we generally keep this terminology to its more Greek origins. And even because any such talk that's rooted in Indian thought, the occultism of India, or the higher, more esoteric sides of yogi philosophy, anyway, that whole system of thought is it's very complicated and it's quite comprehensive. And the terminology, it can take quite a while to learn the terminology. They're words foreign to anybody, almost all English speakers, and they're very specific. They are very specific, and it can take quite a while to learn what they mean. They are more exacting terms, largely, but even an Indian teacher of such things talking to a Westerner, Atkinson points out, largely just goes with the more Greek-oriented terms, and then tries to give definitions to go with them, and correspond with our linguistic understandings of things. But kama manas is one of these isn't one of those more Greek-oriented or rooted terms, and it is specific. The activity of kama manas is mind dominated by desire. See, we don't really have a specific term for that. We have to say something like mind dominated by desire. It's called kama manas, all right? Vibrations in the body of desire, or the astral body, are in this case set up, and under these, this body throws off a vibrating portion of itself, shaped, as in the previous case, by the nature of the vibrations, and this attracts to itself some of the appropriate elemental essence of the astral world. Such a thought form has for its body this elemental essence, and for its animating soul, the desire or passion which threw it forth. according to the amount of mental energy combined with this desire or passion, will be the force of the thought form. These, like those belonging to the mental plane, are called artificial elementals. Exactly what Atkinson called them in both his Arcane Teaching and the Astral World book. And they are by far the most common. These artificial elementals, entities of the astral plane. A few thoughts of ordinary men and women are tinged with desire These, like those belonging to the mental plane, are called artificial elementals, and they are by far the most common, as few thoughts of ordinary men and women are untinged with desire, passion, or emotion. Two effects of thought. Each definite thought, produces a double effect. People, please. A double effect. A radiating vibration and a floating form. The thought itself appears first to clairvoyant sight as a vibration in the mental body. Excuse me. And this may be either simple or complex. If the thought itself is absolutely simple, there is only the one rate of vibration, and only one type of mental matter will be strongly affected. The mental body is composed of matter of several degrees of intensity, which we commonly arrange in classes according to the subplanes of the mental plane. Each of these we have many subdivisions, and if we typify these by drawing horizontal lines to indicate the different degrees of density, there is another arrangement which we might symbolize by drawing perpendicular lines at right angles to the others to denote types which differ in quality as well as in density. There are thus many degrees or varieties of this astral matter. Excuse me, I'm going to start that sentence again. There are thus many varieties of this mental matter. We got it. And it is found that each one of these has its own special and appropriate rate of vibration to which it seems most accustomed, so that it very readily responds to it and tends to return to it as soon as possible when it has been forced away from it by some strong rush of thought or feeling. When a sudden wave of some emotion sweeps over a person, for example, his astral body is thrown into violent agitation, and its original colors are for the time almost obscured by the flush of carmine, of blue, or of scarlet, which corresponds with the rate of vibration of that particular emotion. This change is only temporary. It passes off in a few seconds, and the astral body rapidly resumes its usual condition. Yet every such rush of feeling produces a permanent effect. It always adds a little of its hue to the normal coloring of the astral body, so that every time the person yields himself to a certain emotion, it becomes easier for him to yield himself to it again. Because his astral body is getting into the habit of vibrating at that special rate. It's very important to know these things. This is the occult truth behind many effects that we normally just consider to belong to the field of psychology. And we let it up to the experts in psychology to get it. And the rest of it's just kind of like act on vague ideas about these things. You know, our everyday experience with the results. Knowing how this works, what's going on behind the scenes of the physical plane, and the stuff in our heads gives us not just knowledge, but power, control over such things, greater control. It's very useful information. It's also very useful in understanding things about what I often speak of every time I'm presenting any kind of material like this, and in other videos specifically designated for this other purpose, when I speak of the war on consciousness, how these kinds of things, these entities, thought forms being one of them, okay, are used intentionally by others in a war on consciousness. Used to wage a war against human consciousness and our abilities to develop and evolve toward greater and higher levels of conscious vibration, of vibrations of consciousness. All right? So learning how this all works serves many purposes. The majority of human thoughts, however, are by no means simple. Absolutely pure affection, of course, exists, yeah, but we very often find it tinged with pride, or with selfishness, with jealousy, or with animal passion. This means that at least two separate vibrations appear both in the mental and astral bodies, and frequently more than two. The radiating vibration, therefore, will be a complex one, and the resultant thought form will show several colors instead of just one. How the vibration acts. Now, these radiating vibrations, like all others in nature, become less powerful in proportion to the distance from their source, though it is probable that the variation is in proportion to the cube of the distance instead of to the square, because of the additional dimension involved. Again, like all other vibrations, these tend to reproduce themselves whenever opportunity is offered to them. And so whenever they strike upon another mental body, they tend to provoke in it their own rate of motion. That is, from the point of view of the person whose mental body is touched by these waves. They tend to produce in his mind thoughts of the same type. As that which had previously arisen in the mind of the thinker who sent forth the waves. The distance to which such thought waves penetrate, and the force and persistency with which they impinge upon the mental bodies of others, depend upon the strength and clearness of the original thought. That builds a really strong case right there for learning to gain greater control over attention or mental focus and concentration than is currently possessed by anybody. And so many people, I know this from experience. If I say something about, gaining greater control over attention, they go, oh, yeah, whatever. Yeah, I have an attention deficit disorder, but I don't need greater control over my attention. Or, no, my attention, I can control my attention really well, but most people have no clue Most people have no clue the difference between what current level of control over attention they have, or the content of their minds, the focus, the ability to count out thoughts in favor of one that is the one that's wanted. They have no idea between just how finely tuned that can be and their current state of affairs, and the importance of it, and what can be achieved by increasing that control, that willful control. Paying attention to how this stuff works and what's going on behind the scenes tends to highlight the importance of something like learning to gain greater willful control over focus and selection of the object of focus, the mental object of focus. The distance to which such thought waves penetrate and the force and persistency with which they impinge upon the mental bodies of others depend upon the strength and the clearness of the original thought. In this way, the thinker is in the same position as the speaker. The voice of the latter sets in motion waves of sound in the air which radiate from him in all directions and convey his message to all those who are within hearing. And the distance to which his voice can penetrate depends upon its power and upon the clearness of his enunciation. In just the same way, the forceful thought will carry very much further than the weak and undecided thought. But clearness and definiteness are of even greater importance than strength. Again, just as the speaker's voice may fall upon heedless ears where men are already engaged in business or in pleasure, so may a mighty wave of thought sweep past without affecting the mind of the person if he be already deeply engrossed in some other line of thought. It should be understood that this radiating vibration conveys the character of the thought, but not its subject. If a Hindu sits wrapped in devotion to Krishna, the waves of feeling which pour forth from him stimulate devotional feeling in all those who come under their influence. Though in the case of the Mohammedan or the Muslim, that devotion is to Allah, you see. While for the Zoroastrian, it is to Ahura Mazda. Or for the Christian, to Jesus. A man thinking keenly upon some high subject pours out from himself vibrations which tend to stir up thought at a similar level in others. But they in no way suggest to those others the special subject of his thought. They naturally act with special vigor upon those minds already habituated to vibrations of similar character. There's so much talk about the law of attraction, the secret. Well, it's no secret. It's not like somebody just found out this secret and now they want to just tell everybody about it. No, it's long been known, folks. It's it's not a secret once it's out, anyway. But, the kinds of questions that I know people ask about this law of attraction is being marketed so much these days by people who want to just make money on this stuff. Presenting it like it's some new secret, I don't know. Some of them present it that way. By the nature of some of the questions that I hear people ask, and I know people ask about it, some of this material must be presented in an awfully ambiguous and limited fashion, without much explanation about what's really going on with the whole thing. What's really going on behind the scenes. Here's some of the deeper material about it. And the word law of attraction isn't even, the phrase isn't even mentioned here. You should be able to, figure it out for yourself, and along with a lot of other material that I present here. William Walker Atkinson's material, my own material. All right. The vibrations naturally act with special vigor upon those minds already habituated to vibrations of similar character, yet they have some effect on every mental body upon which they impinge, so that their tendency is to awaken the power of higher thought in those to whom it has not yet become accustomed. It is thus evident that every person who thinks along high lines is doing missionary work, even though he may be entirely unconscious of it. Now, the form and its effect. Let us turn now to the second effect of thought, the creation of a definite form. All students of the occult are acquainted with the idea of the elemental essence. That strange, half-intelligent life which surrounds us in all directions, vivifying the matter of the mental and the astral planes. This matter, thus animated, responds very readily to the influence of human thought, and every impulse sent out, either from the mental body or from the astral body of man. Let me interject. If the word man used like this does not fit into your idea of linguistic correctness, please put that idea aside. That distaste for that use of the word, please. This was written in 1905. And whether the word humanity, human, person, man, woman is used, not the point here. Some word is being used. It happens to be man. This happens to have been written by a woman and a man. This is the term of the day. So let's just get on with it, please. I'm reading it as it's given. Where was I? Every impulse sent out either from the mental body or from the astral body of man immediately clothes itself in a temporary vehicle of this vitalized matter. All right? Such a thought or impulse becomes, for the time, a kind of living creature. The thought force being the soul, and the vivified matter being the body. Instead of using the somewhat clumsy paraphrase, astral or mental matter ensouled by the monadic essence at the stage of one of the elemental kingdoms, okay, for brevity's sake, we sometimes call this quickened matter simply elemental essence. And sometimes we speak of the thought form as an elemental. Not the only kind of elemental, I add. It's just a general term that is sometimes used instead of that longer expression. There may be infinite variety in the color and shape of such elementals or thought forms. For each thought draws around it the matter which is appropriate for its expression, and sets that matter into vibration in harmony with its own, so that the character of the thought decides its color. And the study of its variations and combinations is an exceedingly interesting one. This thought form may not inaptly be compared to a Leyden jar, the coating of living essence being symbolized by the jar, and the thought energy by the charge of electricity, Leyden being spelled Leyden. If the man's thought or feeling is directly connected with someone else, the resultant thought form moves toward that person and discharges itself upon his astral and mental bodies. If the man's thought is about himself or is based upon a personal feeling, as the vast majority of thoughts are, it hovers around its creator and is always ready to react upon him whenever he is for a moment in a passive condition. For example, a man who yields himself to thoughts of impurity may forget all about them while he is engaged in the daily routine of his business, even though the resultant forms are hanging around him in a heavy cloud. Because his attention is otherwise directed, and his astral body is therefore not impressible by any other rate of vibration than its own. Important note there. When, however, the marked vibration slackens and the man rests after his labors and leaves his mind blank as regards definite thought, he is very likely to feel the vibration of an impurity stealing insidiously upon him. Now, this reminds me of something. There are many people, many people, if I mention something about like learning some mental control, they say, why would I want to do that? I want my mind to just be free, be on its own. I don't want to control it. That's mind control. Well, that comes a little close to, being in harmony with this effect I'm talking that's being referred to here. Just kind of like, being open to whatever. Especially the results of one's own thoughts, one's own thought forms that may not have been wisely created. Also, many people refer to methods of meditation and experiment with methods of meditation as novices, just following some common advice or instruction to blank out your mind, make it empty. Mental void, thinking of nothing, just like blank it out, right? Well, listen to this. I'm not going to make any personal comment about that. Just listen to this. When man rests after his labors and leaves his mind blank, as regards definite thought, he is very likely to feel the vibration of impurity stealing insidiously upon him, or whatever. Doesn't have to be necessarily impurity, but look, what they're referring to is this is a time when, in particular, your own creations that are hanging around you, entities of your own, whether you know it or not, and whether you like them or not, whether you would like them if you did know them, creep in. And those are just entities that are the person's own creation. Certainly not the only kinds of entities that there are. Far from it. People, please. Far from it. All right. If the consciousness of the person be to any extent awakened, he may perceive this and cry out that he is being tempted by the devil. That should give some clue as to the power and potential character of a person's own thought forms. Yet the truth is that the temptation is from without only in is that the temptation is from without only in appearance is from without only in appearance. There we go. Is from without only in appearance, since it is nothing but the natural reaction upon him of his own thought forms. Each man travels through space enclosed within a cage of his own building. Excuse me, please. Surrounded by a mass of the forms created by his habitual thoughts. Through this medium, he looks out upon the world, and naturally he sees everything tinged with its predominant colors, and all the rates of vibration which reach him from without are more or less modified by its rate. Thus, until the man learns complete control of thought, there we have it. Complete control of thought. So many people just slough off that idea. And they say, oh, I have really, really good control over my thought. And then next thing you know, he's talking to them and then they're being distracted. Or they heard you, but next day they can barely remember what you said. Because they weren't paying attention. Very little control over thought. Very little control over attention. And quite often here in my channel and many other people talk about thought control, not as in self-discipline, one's mental self-discipline, but thought control from without. Listen, you might, if you knew, and never knew anything about how that might work, just one way only in which that might work, you might be getting an idea from this about how that might work and how simple and easy it is to accomplish. Mind control from outside sources, not your own mental discipline. I'm not talking about. And yet, many people, not you, I'm not talking about you. Could be you. That's up to you to decide. But many people think, oh, well, no, there's some mind control going on in the world. Yeah, I understand, mass mind control, maybe like through television, but, I'm not influenced by that kind of stuff. Nobody controls my thoughts. Nobody has control over my mind. It's closed. It's, no, my thoughts are my own, I have really good control over that stuff, and, I'm not really sure I buy into all this mass mind control junk. Well, I'm going to get back to the book here. Until the man learns complete control of thought and feeling, he sees nothing as it really is. Since all his observations must be made through this medium, which distorts and colors everything like badly made glass. If the thought form, by being neither definitely personal nor especially aimed at someone else, it simply floats, detached, in the atmosphere, all the time radiating vibrations similar to those originally sent forth by its creator. If it does not come into contact with any other mental body. This radiation gradually exhausts its store of energy, and in that case, the form falls to pieces. But if it succeeds in awakening sympathetic vibration in any mental body near at hand, an attraction is set up. And the thought form is usually absorbed by that mental body. Thus, we see that the influence of the thought form is by no means so far-reaching as that of the original vibration, but insofar as it acts with much greater precision. What it produces in the mind body, which it influences, is not merely a thought of an order similar to that which gave it birth. In this case, like the vibration, it's just like generally the same in character. In this case, in the thought form, it's actually the same thought that is produced. The radiation may affect thousands and stir up in them thoughts on the same level as the original, and yet it may happen that no one of them will be identical with that original. The thought form can affect only very few, but in those few cases it will produce exactly the initiatory idea. The fact of the creation by vibrations of a distinct form, geometrical or other, is already familiar to every student of acoustics. And Chladni's figures are continually reproduced in every physical laboratory. Whether or not we know what that Chladni's figures are is not so important. Now, coming up here in the book are some diagrams, figures, geometrical patterns, symmetrical patterns, and so forth. Some of this, if you are familiar with what is currently being called cymatics, you'll know what's being the kind of thing that are being referred to here. I can't show you the diagrams, but I can certainly read you the text. And there will be an explanation of what's going on here. We call this, these days, you can find videos of this at work on YouTube. Look up cymatics, C-Y-M-A-T-I-C-S. You'll be able to see what's going on here, but it's not required. Just hear what's being stated. For the lay reader, the following brief description may be useful. A Chladni's sound plate is made of brass or plate glass. Grains of fine sand or spores are scattered over the surface, and the edge of the plate is bowed. The sand is thrown up into the air by the vibration of the plate, and the refalling on the plate is arranged in regular lines. By touching the edge of the plate at different points when it is bowed, different notes, and hence varying forms, are obtained. If the figures here given are compared with those obtained from the human voice, many likenesses will be observed. For these latter, the voice forms, so admirably studied and pictured by Mrs. Watts Hughes, bearing witness to the same fact, should be consulted, and her work on the subject should be in the hands of every student. But few perhaps have realized that the shapes pictured are due to the interplay of the vibrations that create them. And by the way, Miss Watts Hughes, her real name is Margaret Watts Hughes, and the text being referred to with this reference to her is called the Edophone Voice Figures. If you want to look it up, you might be able to find that. The shapes pictured are due to the interplay of the vibrations that create them, and that a machine exists by means of which two or more simultaneous motions can be imparted to a pendulum, and that by attaching a fine drawing pen to a lever connected with the pendulum, its actions may be exactly traced. A substitute for the swing of the pendulum, the vibrations set up in the mental or astral body. And we have clearly before us the modus operandi of the building of forms by vibrations. Now, a Mr. Joseph Gold, Stratford House, Nottingham, supplies the twin elliptic pendulum by which these wonderful figures may be produced. The following description is taken from a most interesting essay entitled Vibration Figures, by F. Bly Bond, who has drawn a number of remarkable figures by the use of pendulums. The pendulum is suspended on knife edges of hardened steel and is free to swing only at right angles to the knife edge suspension. 4 such pendulums may be coupled in pairs, swinging at right angles to each other by threads connecting the shafts of each pair of pendulums with the ends of a light but rigid lath from the center, at which run other threads. These threads carry the united movements of each pair of pendulums to a light square of wood suspended by a spring and bearing a pen. The pen is thus controlled by the combined movement of the 4 pendulums, and this movement is registered on a drawing board by the pen. There is no limit, theoretically, to the number of pendulums that can be combined in this manner. The movements are rectilinear, but 2 rectilinear vibrations of equal amplitude acting at right angles to each other generate a circle if they alternate precisely, an ellipse if the alternations are less regular or the amplitudes unequal. A cyclic vibration may also be obtained from a pendulum free to swing in a rotary path. In these ways, a most wonderful series of drawings have been obtained, and the similarity of these to some of the thought forms is remarkable. They suffice to demonstrate how readily vibrations may be transformed into figures. Now that is a very packed statement. That's like a suitcase. And if you open it, all kinds of things are inside. The similarity of these. In these ways, a most wonderful series of drawings have been obtained, and the similarity of these to some of the thought forms is remarkable. They suffice to demonstrate how readily vibrations may be transformed into figures. Now, just consider symbolism, right? Geometrical shapes, what's called sacred geometry, the use of symbols, the use of various symbols, and when transposed into numbers, the numerical equivalents or formulas behind certain geometrical shapes, getting into what tends to be called numerology or sacred numbers or whatever, Listen, when it comes to mass control, war on consciousness, we have various people who I suggest are in cahoots with many entities that aren't physical or entities that aren't of this planet, whatever. You don't have to believe any of that particular stuff, but all you have to understand here is that when certain symbols are used, certain shapes, figures, symbols, numbers, and so forth are used in specific ways with specific intent, in combination with other methods and techniques, it's pretty simple to set up the character, the vibrations, the forces, the character, and the content, the mental and astral content associated with those figures, numbers, symbols, and so forth in the minds of other people. And to do things with greater power and force. It seems to us a most marvelous thing that some of the drawings, made apparently at random by the use of this machine, should exactly correspond to higher types of thought forms created in meditation. We are sure that a wealth of significance lies behind this fact, though it will need much further investigation before we can say certainly all that it means. These figures made by this machine, that is. But it must surely imply this much, that if two forces on the physical plane, bearing a certain ratio to one another, can draw a form which exactly corresponds to that produced on the mental plane by a complex thought, we may infer that that thought sets in motion on its own plane two forces which are in the same ratio one to the other. What these forces are and how they work remains to be seen. But if we are ever able to solve this problem, it is likely that it will open to us a new and exceedingly valuable field of knowledge. Now, I'm looking at some of these shapes here. Do you remember a drawing instrument that used to be, I don't know if these things are still available in toy stores. The age range that it was called a spirograph. I don't know if you are familiar with that. When I was a teenager, spirographs, a lot of kids, some kids had spirographs. You could create these beautiful, beautiful geometric patterns. Many lines intersecting in various ways in a very flowing style. A lot of these patterns look like the results of spirograph work. Very much the same kinds of things. General principles. 3 general principles underlie the production of all thought forms. 1. The quality of the thought determines color. Nature of thought determines form. And 3. Definiteness of thought determines clearness of outline. Let me give you them again. General principles. 3 general principles underlie the production of all thought forms. 1. Quality of thought. What does quality of thought determine? Color. What does the nature of the thought determine? The form. And what does the definiteness of the thought determine? Clearness of the outline. So we have the color, the form, and outline clearness, determined respectively by quality of the thought, nature of the thought, and definiteness of the thought. Quality, nature, definiteness. Color, form, clearness. The meaning of the colors. There's a whole table of colors given in this book. And there is another book called Man, Visible and Invisible. The meanings of the colors are thoroughly described in that book called Man, Visible and Invisible. The meaning to be attached to them is just the same in the thought form as in the body out of which it is evolved. For the sake of those who have not at hand the full description given in the book Man, Visible and Invisible, it'll be well to state that black means hatred and malice. Red of all shades, from lurid brick red to brilliant scarlet, indicates anger. Brutal anger will show as flashes of your lurid red from dark brown clouds, while the anger of noble indignation is a vivid scarlet, by no means unbeautiful, though it gives an unpleasant thrill. A particularly dark and unpleasant red, almost exactly the color called dragon's blood, shows animal passion and sensual desire of various kinds. Clear brown, almost burnt sienna, shows avarice. Hard, dull brown gray is a sign of selfishness. a color which is indeed painfully common. Deep, heavy gray signifies depression. While a livid pale gray is associated with fear. Gray-green is a signal of deceit, while brownish green, usually flecked with points and flashes of scarlet, betokens jealousy. Green seems to always denote adaptability. In the lowest case, when mingled with selfishness, this adaptability becomes deceit. At a later stage, when the color becomes purer, it means rather the wish to be all things to all men, even though it may be chiefly for the sake of becoming popular or bearing a good reputation with them. In its still higher, more delicate, and more luminous aspect, it shows the divine power of sympathy. Affection expresses itself in all shades of crimson and rose. A full, clear carmine means a strong, healthy affection of normal type. If stained heavily with brown-gray, a selfish and grasping feeling is indicated, while pure pale rose marks that absolutely unselfish love which is possible only to high natures. It passes from the dull crimson of animal love to the most exquisite shades of delicate rose. Like the early flushes of the dawning, as the love becomes purified from all selfish elements and flows out in wider and wider circles of generous, impersonal tenderness and compassion to all who are in need. With a touch of the blue of devotion in it, this may express a strong realization of the universal brotherhood of humanity. Deep orange imports pride or ambition, and the various shades of yellow denote intellect or intellectual gratification. Dull yellow ochre implying the direction of such faculty to selfish purposes, while clear gamboge or gamboge shows a distinctly higher type, and pale luminous primrose yellow is a sign of the highest and most unselfish use of intellectual power. The pure reason directed to spiritual ends. Pale luminous primrose yellow. The different shades of blue all indicate religious feeling and range through all hues from the dark brown blue of selfish devotion or the pallid gray blue of fetish worship tinged with fear up to the rich, deep, clear color of heartfelt adoration and the beautiful pale azure of that highest form which implies self-renunciation and union with the divine. The devotional thought of an unselfish heart is very lovely in color, like the deep blue of a summer sky. Though such clouds of blue will often shine out golden stars of great brilliancy, darting upwards like a shower of sparks. A mixture of affection and devotion is manifested by a tint of violet. And the more delicate shades of this invariably show the capacity of absorbing and responding to a high and beautiful ideal. The brilliancy and the depth of the colors are usually a measure of the strength and the activity of the feeling. The brilliancy and the depth of the colors are usually a measure of the strength and the activity of the feeling. Another consideration which must not be forgotten is the type of matter in which these forms are generated. If a thought be purely intellectual and impersonal, for example, if the thinker is attempting to solve a problem in algebra or geometry, let's say, the thought form and the wave of vibration, the thought form, one, and the wave of vibration will be confined entirely to the mental plane. If, however, the thought be of a spiritual nature, if it be tinged with love and aspiration or deep unselfish feeling, it will rise upwards from the mental plane and will borrow much of the splendor and glory of the Buddhic level. Now, that hasn't been defined here. It is of a higher mental plane nature than the mental plane in general being referred to here. Okay. Depending on how we break things up when it comes to the planes, how we categorize them, like I've said elsewhere in other videos, it varies. You know, how things are grouped together varies depending on the school of thought, depending on the point of view being presented, depending on the person who's talking about it and how specific they want to be, how specific the subject matter calls for, and so forth, right? But there is generally what is called the lower mental plane, and then there's what's the higher mental plane, also sometimes called the causal plane. Now, there are subdivisions, subplanes, and so forth, and when it comes to the more Sanskrit or Indian, terminology, the verbiage, the naming, and the grouping become very specific. Such as the Buddhic level. Buddhic level. There are many such terms that are employed. The Buddhic level, it's implying here, all we need to know about it right now is that in some cases, some people might, if not even knowing the term Buddhic level, but knowing what it denotes, or having a general idea of what it denotes, may refer to it in so many different ways. But let's just generally concede that it is above what we typically call is a rate of vibration greater than what we typically would call intellect. All right, in such a case, its influence is exceedingly powerful. And every such thought is a mighty force for good which cannot but produce a decided effect upon all mental bodies within reach if they contain any quality at all capable of response. This is important. I have said elsewhere, my dear listeners, I have said elsewhere in my War on Consciousness talk, I have referred to innumerable times by now about movement toward true selfhood, getting above the vibrations, the vibration frequency bandwidths, the frequency bandwidths of vibration, okay, of the world controllers who are engaged in war on consciousness. Getting above that level of influence at the consciousness level. And I have said it many times by now, and I am endeavoring to give information that supports what I'm saying, like this, as well as information that gives us practical instruction, or from which practical instruction can be inferred. And I am in the process, an ongoing thing here on my channel, to give methods that are grounded in this knowledge and that lead us toward those ends. Now, here is some very good supporting information for that whole package I just stated. In such a case, its influence is exceedingly powerful, and every such thought is a mighty force for good which cannot but produce a decided effect upon all mental bodies within reach if they contain any quality at all capable of response. So what I'm trying to get, the reason why I stopped right there and gave you that package that I said of my own, okay, referring to other things in my channel and what I'm trying to get done here, trying to be of help to people, right now is I'm saying that to be able to produce thought forms of our own for our own sake and for the sake of others that are vibrating at these frequencies is an extremely constructive thing to do. A very helpful thing to do. A very practical thing to do. And it's vibrating at a much higher rate than the thought forms and vibration rates that are influencing us by those who wish to control us. And such vibrations, like are being referred to here, those frequencies, very powerful, and tend to trump the lower ones. Okay. If, on the other hand, the thought has in it something of self or of personal desire, at once its vibration turns downwards, and it draws around itself a body of astral matter in addition to its clothing of mental matter. Such a thought form is capable of acting upon the astral bodies of other men as well as their minds, so that it can not only raise thought within them, but also stir up their feelings. Three classes of thought forms. From the point of view of the forms which they produce, we may group thought into three classes. Excuse me. 1. That which takes the image of the thinker. 2. That which takes the image of some material object. I'm going to describe these further. And 3. That which takes a form entirely of its own. First, that which takes the image of the thinker. When a man thinks of himself as in some distant place, or wishes earnestly to be in that place, he makes a thought form in his own image which appears there. I just want to point something out. I mentioned before I began this narration in this video that thought forms can become, it's already being described here, that they can become an entity with a life of their own, right? That life of their own can be further vitalized by means of a very strongly focused desire force being put into them by their creator. And number 2, accompanied by, number 2, a strong mental image. A strong, clear mental image projected into them, or along with the creation of the thought form. Or as part of the thought form. They become much more vitalized that way. And here it says, when a man thinks of himself as in some distant place or wishes earnestly to be in that place, he makes a thought form in his own image which appears there. Now, consider somebody who knows how to create such a thought form, strongly vitalized, and add in the knowledge that sometimes thought forms, there are cases in which some thought forms can actually partially materialize. A highly vitalized thought form can interact in a partially manifested or materialized manner. Now consider cases that have been known as bilocation, where a person is seen in two different places physically at the same time. We may have heard stories of so-called masters who can do this. Now, I'm not saying that the method in which I'm suggesting is how they do it. I'm saying that the method in which that I am suggesting is a very real thing, okay? And it gives us, it informs us. It lets us understand the possibility, the probability, the actuality of the actual phenomena of bilocation. Kind of like makes it real for us. All right. He makes a thought form in his own image, which appears there. Such a form has not infrequently been seen by others. And has sometimes been taken for the astral body or apparition of the man himself. Again, like I'm saying, I'm not saying that masters who bilocate are using this specific method. But this is one way in which that happens. That kind of thing happens. It doesn't even have to be conscious. You know, it's done consciously by the creator of the thought form. In such a case, either the seer must have enough of clairvoyance for the time to be able to observe that astral shape, or the thought form must have sufficient strength to materialize itself. That is, to draw around itself temporarily a certain amount of physical matter as well. Simply that. The thought which generates such a form as this must necessarily be a strong one, and it therefore employs a larger proportion of the matter of the mental body, so that though the form is small and compressed, when it leaves the thinker, it draws around it a considerable amount of astral matter, and usually expands to life size before it appears at its destination. Once again, what does this say? The thought which generates such a form as this must necessarily be a strong one. And I remind you once again of people who say what? Learn to control my thoughts, learn to, have greater willful control over my attention. Why? What for? Well, one reason, if we want to refer to the war on consciousness again, there are people who are psychopathic, predatory, and parasitic, who have control over us, and who are waging a war on consciousness against us, and are currently redoubling their efforts as people are becoming a bit more aware of their game. All right? They are very good at this stuff. They're very practiced with it. They are very good at it. And they have under their employ, by one means or another, people who research this and are brainwashed and trained in it from youth through means of trauma-based mind control and many other forms, right? Whose abilities to do this kind of stuff are greatly enhanced. So, it's a pretty good idea, to know how some of this stuff operates. And to consider doing things to protect oneself against it. By learning how this works and taking practical steps to get good at it oneself, for one's own protection, and to assist the world rather than to assist humanity, to assist a others' conscious awareness at many levels of operation, seen or unseen, to be constructive. And at this point, now that I gave that clue, I need to point out cause and effect is always in operation. Whatever you send out has its effect on you. At some point, in some manner. And if that is a willfully and intentionally destructive or one geared toward devolution of others, its effect back on you later at some point will be almost triple what you sent out. And it will come back to you with the added content of all the harm that it has done in its trip from you and back. It's just the law of cause and effect at work. This is how it works. There are other laws at work with it. Polarity, so forth. So if you're thinking of using this information to go practice something so that you can, mind control other people, and play your dirty little games, just forget it. Forget I even posted this video. All right? We don't need any more of that kind of stuff going on. Besides, anybody with those motives is going to come up against somebody else who has higher motives, and those higher vibrations that person is going to create, you're going to trump the lower ones. Okay. See, I'm not here to create immoral people with, intense mental power and knowledge of how to use it. I'm simply not here to do that. Not at all. I have a distaste for that kind of thing. And it's because of that distaste, that's one of my motives for posting this kind of material. Anybody who goes about such affairs, applying such knowledge with those ill motives, is engaging in evil, black magic, and should stop listening right now and go do something else. Number 2, those which take the image of some material object. When a man thinks of his friend, he forms within his mental body a minute image of that friend. You hear that? A minute image. I have referred to elsewhere, even in names. The name of a video that I just posted, the description of it is about a daily closure technique, an emotional closure technique. Just posted it, I don't know, maybe 12 hours ago, 14 hours ago, something like that. Right in the description of it, something about the technique, daily emotional closure technique, has a side benefit of aiding in sharpening your ability to create mental images. This is an extremely important aspect of mentalism. Here it's brought up. When a man thinks of his friend, he forms within his mental body a minute image, little image of that friend. Now, our ability to do these kinds of things intentionally is a very important thing. If we want to I was going to say wage, battle against the war on consciousness. No, I don't want to be saying that. No, if we want to rise above the influence of those who wage a war on consciousness against humanity, these are very important tools. And I have pointed that out elsewhere. I have pointed out in another video, I think it's called Act Now 4. Act Now number 4. Some of the tools required. I think it's that one. Some of the tools, the necessary requirements for moving toward true selfhood. One of them is the ability to create very strong mental images in association with very strong attention control, concentration. It's useful in all the techniques that I have named, that I have posted. The calm attention technique for developing and implementing a mode of calm confidence. And there are a couple others that I have now posted. The one about motives and goals, and the one about daily, emotional closure technique. Well, these things come into play. The better we get at all of these little things and use them together in ways that at least I am trying to provide here, that I am providing here, the more we make a movement toward true selfhood. Right. That which takes the image of some material object. When a man thinks of his friend, he forms within his mental body a minute image of that friend, which often passes outward and usually floats suspended in the air before him. In the same way, if he thinks of a room, a house, a landscape, tiny images of these things are formed within the mental body and afterwards externalized. This is equally true when he is exercising his imagination. The root word in imagination, again, being image. Okay? The painter who forms a conception of his future picture builds it up out of the matter of his mental body and then projects it into space in front of him, keeps it before his mind's eye, and copies it. The novelist, in the same way, builds images of his character in mental matter, and by the exercise of his will, moves these puppets from one position or grouping to another, so that the plot of his story is literally acted out before him. With our curiously inverted conceptions of reality, it's hard for us to understand that these mental images actually exist and are so entirely objective that they may readily be seen by the they are so entirely objective that they may readily be seen by the clairvoyant. It's very hard to imagine that. Very hard with our curiously inverted conceptions of reality, it's hard for understand these things. And also that they can even be rearranged by someone other than their creator. Some novelists have been dimly aware of such a process and have testified that their characters, when once created, developed a will of their own and insisted on carrying the plot of the story along lines quite different from those originally intended by the author. Now, most people are so unaware of such things that if they heard a novelist say that, they might say he might need to see a shrink. This has actually happened, sometimes because the thought forms were ensouled by playful nature spirits, a different kind of entity than a thought form. Or more often because some so-called dead novelist, watching on the astral plane the development of the plan of his fellow author, thought that he could improve upon it, and chose this method of putting forward his suggestions. And number 3, that which takes a form entirely of its own, expressing its inherent qualities in the matter which it draws around it. Only thought forms of this third class can usefully be illustrated, for to represent those of the first or the second class would be merely to draw portraits or landscapes. In those types, we have the plastic, mental, or astral matter molded in imitation of forms belonging to the physical plane. In this third group, we have a glimpse of the forms natural to the astral or mental planes, rather than the physical. Yet this very fact, which makes them so interesting, places an insuperable barrier in the way of their accurate reproduction. Thought forms of this third class almost invariably manifest themselves upon the astral plane, as the vast majority of them are expressions of feeling as well as of thought. Now, those of which we here give specimens are almost wholly of that class, except that we take a few examples of the beautiful thought forms created in definite meditation by those who, through long practice, have learned how to think. Thought forms directed toward individuals produce definitely marked effects. These effects being either partially reproduced in the aura of the recipient, and so increasing the total result, or repelled from it. Very good clue. A thought of love and of desire to protect, directed strongly. This means concentrated thought. Willful, concentrated thought. That's what it means here. Directed strongly towards some beloved object. Creates a form which goes to the person thought of. Oh, and by the way, it doesn't necessarily have to be intentional or consciously, willfully concentrated thought. I mean, it doesn't have to be like on purpose doing this. I mean, oftentimes, a very strong power, willpower, strong-willed, concentrated thought comes up, sometimes in the case of emergencies or surprise, whatever. And those are not intentional, strong thoughts. They arise sometimes. All right. Creates a form which goes to the person thought of and remains in his aura as a shielding and protecting agent. It will seek all opportunities to serve and all opportunities to defend, if such is the nature of the thought. Not by a conscious and deliberate action, but by a blind following out of the impulse impressed upon it. And it will strengthen friendly forces that impinge on the aura and weaken unfriendly ones. There is a huge clue about how this kind of knowledge can be used constructively. So I'll read it again. A thought of love and of desire to protect, directed strongly towards some beloved object, creates a form which goes to the person thought of and remains in his aura as a shielding and protecting agent. It will seek all opportunities to serve and all opportunities to defend, not by a conscious and deliberate action, but by a blind following out of the impulse impressed upon it, and it will strengthen friendly forces that impinge on the aura and weaken unfriendly ones. Thus, may we create and maintain veritable guardian angels around those we love. And many a mother's prayer for a distant child thus circles round him, though she knows not the method by which her prayer is answered, so to speak. In cases in which good or evil thoughts are projected at individuals, those thoughts, if they are to directly fulfill their mission, must find in the aura of the object to whom they are sent materials capable of responding sympathetically to their vibrations. Any combination of matter can only vibrate within certain definite limits. And if the thought form be outside all the limits within which the aura is capable of vibrating, it cannot affect that aura at all. It consequently rebounds from it, and that with a force proportionate to the energy with which it impinged upon it. That is why it is said that a pure heart and mind are the best protectors against any inimical assaults. For a pure heart and mind will construct an astral and a mental body of fine and subtle materials, and these bodies cannot respond to vibrations that demand coarse and dense matter. That right there is plenty of backing, occult knowledge backing for my claims here on my channel that movement toward true selfhood is the answer to the war on consciousness. However, any such movement, while being a movement towards serving that purpose should not be the ultimate reason for moving in that direction, making a movement toward true selfhood. No. There are much higher reasons than that. Ultimately, one way to put the ultimate reason would be for its own sake. That's just one simple way of putting it. But if, with current affairs, that are just simply the cumulative result of similar affairs along the same lines for a long time in the history of humanity, given that, this late war on consciousness talk and the truth of it, that's a really good reason to make such a movement, toward true selfhood. Anyway, it's just kind of like this with respect to that. Humanity in large, has been unaware of such a thing as a movement toward true selfhood. There have been many ideas that clog the way to understanding what that means or what that is or that it can be done or that it is what to do all along. And it's just become more and more urgently imperative as time has gone on. And right now, I say, as in the name of 4 of my videos posted now, act now. It's like crunch time. Let's just say it's crunch time with respect to it all. No longer just something to be led up to chance, a natural course of events, or to be ignored, or to be considered hocus pocus. And I would say that if somebody who is listening to this is concerned about what about people who have no access to this kind of information, we can send in their direction intentional thought forms that would tend to influence them. Beyond that, there's not much we can do. Each person is in a position that they are in, or he or she is in, due to all of its past. It's all cause and effect at work. And if somebody is not in a position to have any access or has ever heard of such information whatsoever, and no word is going to reach them anytime soon, well, then, aside from projecting thought forms in their direction, in that general class of direction, for the sake of humanity in general, in addition to that, don't worry about it. It's out of your control. Just think similarly like this about yourself. There's still more information, more knowledge that's not reaching you, that you're not in a position to receive. Relative measure of things. If an evil thought, projected with malefic intent, strikes such a body, it can only rebound from it, and it is thus flung back with all its own energy. It then flies backward along the magnetic line of least resistance, that which it has just traversed, and strikes its projector. He, having matter in his astral and mental body similar to that of the thought form he generated, is thrown into respondent vibrations and suffers the destructive effects he has intended to cause to another. Thus, curses and blessings, they come home to roost. I was referring to that a little while ago here. From this arises also the very serious effects of hating or suspecting a good and highly advanced man. The thought forms sent against him cannot injure him. Wow, what another good clue. More support for a movement toward true selfhood. War on consciousness again. All right. And they rebound against their projectors, shattering them mentally, morally, and physically. Several such instances are well known to us who write this, having come under their direct observation. So long as any of the coarser kinds of matter connected with evil and selfish thoughts remain in a person's body, he is open to attack from those who wish him evil. He is open to attack from those who wish him evil, but when he has perfectly eliminated these by self-purification, his haters cannot injure him. And he goes on calmly and peacefully amid all the darts of their malice. So long as any of the coarser kinds of matter connected with evil and selfish thoughts remain in a person's body, He is open to attack from those who wish him evil. But it is bad for those who shoot out such darts. See, when he has perfectly eliminated these by self-purification, his haters cannot injure him, and he goes on calmly and peacefully amid all the darts of their malice. But it's bad for those who shoot out such darts. Another point that should be mentioned before passing to the consideration of our illustrations is that every one of the thought forms here given is drawn from life. Now, there are going to be illustrations provided here, and I don't have the illustrations physically on hand to show you. These are not imaginary forms, prepared as some dreamer thinks they should appear. These are representations of forms actually observed as thrown off by ordinary men and women and either reproduced with all possible care and fidelity by those who have seen them or with the help of artists to whom the seers have described them. Now, let me see if there's anything here that I can actually provide for you. No. That's going to be useful without looking at the illustrations. No. It's describing the colors, the shapes, and so forth. Examples is what's being given here. Now, let me just read this one, though, for you. Few thought forms are more beautiful and expressive than this which we see in Figure 12. This is a thought of love and peace, protection and benediction, sent forth by one who has the power and has earned the right to bless. It is not at all probable that in the mind of its creator there existed any thought of its beautiful wing-like shape, though it is possible that some unconscious reflection of faraway lessons of childhood about guardian angels who always hovered over their charges have had its influence in determining this. However that may be, the earnest wish undoubtedly clothed itself in this graceful and expressive outline, while the affection that prompted it to give it its lovely rose color and the intellect which guided it shone forth like sunlight at its heart and central support. Thus, in sober truth, we may make veritable guardian angels to hover over and protect those whom we love. And many an unselfish earnest wish for good produces such a form as this, though all unknown to its creator. So imagine if you know this and you not only send forth such thoughts, vitalized with mental imagery, but you do it with finely tuned attention, strong use of will, with full knowledge that that will is really universal will flowing through you, okay? And you intentionally and knowingly, I've said this so often in my videos, to know how this stuff works and intentionally employ that knowledge is half the thing. That's a whole separate dimension of effectiveness thrown in. To know the colors, to know the colors, to know what's going on, to send these specific forms enhances the effect even much, much greater. I mean, what was being described here is being suggested that probably the creator of that thought form that looks like an angel, looks like what we might picture to be a guardian angel in the beautiful rose color that it has, was probably completely unaware of this effect going on behind the scenes. So imagine if the person who created that thought form actually knew how to do that, knew the colors involved, knew the shape to create, how much more definite that thought form would have been. Now consider evil people who are projecting thought forms intentionally at you or at somebody else or just at humanity in general as a huge, let's say, what's that, legion of, of activity going on in that direction, right? People who know how to do this and are doing it with very low vibration thought forms, with specific thought content involved. Imagine now, think of it, applying this kind of thing to block them, wipe them out, make them disintegrate, disperse their matter, the material that they're made out of, to replace them with thought forms of a much better nature, and so forth. Why don't we talk about a war on consciousness? We're going to talk about invoking or evoking other entities to help out behind the scenes. This is what we can do. This is the thought form level at which we can work. This is why I'm reading this to you. One reason. You need to know about thought forms. And we need to apply specific techniques and methods, practice with them, get good at them, things that are necessary conditions to make this work. Things like attention control, strong mental imagery, the development of the use of will, and knowing what your relationship with power of will is. I've pointed this out elsewhere. I think that Act 4 video, that's some necessary conditions for movement toward true selfhood, and I'm providing techniques here that aid in these things, and I'm going to provide more. I want to keep drawing these connecting these dots here. That's why I interject in these readings, in these orations, these narrations. That's why I interject. That's why I stop, like right here, because I want to keep connecting dots. I'm not just narrating a book. There are reasons, I'm not going to just assume that you're going to sit there and listen to this or watch this video and connect these dots, because you might not have seen my other videos, you might not have seen the related material, or you might have, but then you're just in more passive listening mode. So I'm being more forthright here. Here are some dots. Here's what I'm trying. Here, please connect these for yourself. I'm giving you the connections. I'm trying to give you the connections so that they get planted in there. All right. So there are these illustrations, and I gave you an example of one of them. I think that gives a general picture of what these illustrations are like. Now, there are conditions under which the grace and strength peculiar to a higher plane may in a measure be brought down to a lower one, and may spread abroad there with wonderful effect. This seems to be possible only when a special channel is for the moment opened, and that work must be done from below and by the effort of man. It has before been explained that whenever a man's thought or feeling is selfish, the energy which it produces moves in a close curve, and thus inevitably returns and expends itself upon its own level. But when the thought or feeling is absolutely unselfish, its energy rushes forth in an open curve, and thus does not return in the ordinary sense, but pierces through into the plane above. Because only in that higher condition, with its additional dimension, can it find room for its expansion. But in thus breaking through, such a thought or feeling holds open a door, to speak symbolically now, of dimension equivalent to its own diameter, and thus furnishes the requisite channel through which the divine force, appropriate to the higher plane, can pour itself into the lower with marvelous results. Not only for the thinker, but for others. An attempt is made in figure 17 to symbolize this and to indicate the great truth that an infinite flood of the higher type of force is always ready and waiting to pour through when the channel is offered. Just as the water in a cistern may be said to be waiting to pour through the first pipe that may be opened. The result of the descent of divine life is a very great strengthening and uplifting of the maker of the channel, and the spreading all about him of a most powerful and beneficent influence. This effect has often been called an answer to a prayer. Look, a cattail. That's all it is. It's just a cattail. There's no cat. There's no actual... Oh, there's the cat. Hi. There's a cat head. Cat head and a cat tail, but no body. That's Panther. This is Panther. Hi, Panther. Say hi, Panther. Say hi, everybody. All right, she's getting down now, and we're continuing with our book. This effect has often been called an answer to prayer, and it has been attributed by the ignorant to what they call a special interposition of providence. If you are somebody who uses that phrase and holds that to be the way things work, special interposition of providence, go ahead and keep on thinking of that and using that phrase. Add into that this information as well. And just combine them together and broaden your knowledge base. That's all. Nothing especially contradictory here or anything like that. Just more information. This effect has often been called an answer to prayer and has been attributed by some to what they call a special interposition of providence instead of to the unerring action of the great and immutable divine law. Self-renunciation. Figure 16 gives us yet another form of devotion, producing an exquisitely beautiful form of a type quite new to us. In fact, a type in which one might at first sight suppose that various graceful shapes belonging to animate nature were being imitated. Figure 16, for example, is somewhat suggestive of a partially opened flower bud, while other forms are found to bear a certain resemblance to shells or leaves or tree shapes. Manifestly, however, these are not and cannot be copies of vegetable or animal forms, and it seems probable that the explanation of the similarity lies very much deeper than that. An analogous and even more significant fact is that some very complex thought forms can be exactly imitated by the action of certain mechanical forces. Whilst with our present knowledge it would seem it would be unwise to attempt a solution of the very fascinating problem presented by these remarkable resemblances. It seems likely that we are obtaining a glimpse across the threshold of a very mighty mystery. For if by certain thoughts we produce a form which has been duplicated by the processes of nature, we have at least a presumption that these forces of nature work along lines similar to the action of those thoughts. Highly suggestive of what we call universal mind, cosmic mind, at work. And that's the macrocosm, one aspect of what we call the macrocosm, and our mental activity and its attending levels of operation, which are being talked about here, are the microcosm, all taking place within the macrocosm. Folks, what's going on here? This macrocosm, microcosm thing that's being noticed right here. While the authors here are trying to say that they are uncertain of the exact chemistry involved, let's say, for lack of a better term, we can refer to universal laws that we already know about at work here. Very clearly what's going on. In the arcane teachings, William Walker Atkinson's arcane teachings, some universal laws. You can find books, like I pointed out elsewhere. You look up universal laws, my goodness, you'll have somebody saying there are 7 of them. You'll have somebody else saying there are 700. And those who say there are 7 or there are 10 or there are 20 or there are 100, their list might be different than somebody else's. What I offered in the arcane teaching is, in my opinion, with my knowledge, experience, and research, all 3, right? Or experience and research resulting in what I know of it, all, and I mean actual experience, in various ways. The arcane teachings presents the basic, fundamental, elementary, fundamental, foundational laws at work in the manifest cosmos. We can see right here the metaphysical law of analogy, which can also be called correspondence among planes. It can also be denoted with the phrase, the maxim, the axiom, the precept, as above, so below, as below, so above. Which means that the same laws of operation that operate at one plane of reality or at one level of discourse operate at others. It's a means, applying the law is a means by which we can understand other planes of operation by understanding one. But we can also see it at work in the cosmos. Just notice it. And the more we look for these laws at work, like right here, good example of it, the better we understand the laws and the better we understand the cosmos, the better we understand our relationship with it. This is a very good example of all of that happening at one time for us if we are aware of it and allow ourselves to be aware of it. And then the better we get at it, the more we become aware of specific cases of these things at work like this, these laws at work, the better we get at noticing them, and then the better we get at learning how to apply them in our lives. And the better we get at being able to pick out how others who use this kind of information maliciously are doing what they're doing, when they're doing it, how they're doing it, and what they might do next. Since the universe is itself a mighty thought form called into existence by the Logos, it may well be that tiny parts of it are also the thought forms of minor entities engaged in the same work. And thus perhaps we may approach a comprehension of what is meant by the 330 million devas of the Hindus. This form is of the loveliest pale azure, with a glory of white light shining through it, something indeed to tax the skill even of the indefatigable artist, who worked so hard to get them as nearly right as possible. It is what a Catholic would call a definite act of devotion, better still, an act of utter selflessness, of self-surrender and renunciation. Now, I am not going to read any more of the descriptions of these illustrations unless I'm scanning down here very quickly and see something that gives more information than just a description of a picture. No, not yet. This does go on for some while here in this book. I'm sorry. I know about the content of this book, long before I started out. But the information that I can give to you by way of video, narration, oration from this book is so important that I had to do it. I had to give you this information, but I don't want to just waste time describing what an illustration looks like. And what's being talked about here is selfish ambition, high ambition, and figures that are representations of thought forms associated with those things. Actual thought forms that have been seen, and then an artist has rendered them. Let me give you an example so you know where we're at here. Ambition of a lower type is represented in figure 21. Not only have we here a large stain of a dull gray, brown gray of selfishness, but there is also a considerable difference in the form, though it appears to possess equal definiteness of outline compared to that of one of high ambition. So you see, there's not much useful information here for us other than to just see examples. Now here is one that's a cloud with a lightning bolt coming out of it. It looks just like that. Let's see what's said about it here. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to give you that either because I don't have the figure numbers immediately at hand. You'll be noted that here's just something I'm picking out. It'll be noted that both of them take the flash-like form. That had to do with what kind of emotion? What kind of thought? Murderous rage and sustained anger. Cloud with a lightning bolt coming out. That's what it looked like. Murderous rage and sustained anger. We have two terrible examples of the awful effect of anger. The lurid flash from dark clouds was taken from the aura of a rough and partially intoxicated man in the east side of London as he struck down a woman. The flash darted out at her the moment before he raised his hand to strike, folks, and caused a shuddering feeling of horror in her, as though it might slay it itself. The keen-pointed stiletto-like dart was a thought of steady anger, intense and desiring vengeance of the quality of murder, sustained through years and directed against a person who had inflicted a deep injury on the one who sent it forth. Had the latter been possessed of a strong and trained will, such a thought form would slay. And the one nourishing it is running a very serious danger of becoming a murderer in act as well as in thought in a future, wait for it, incarnation. Friends, this is serious stuff. This is really serious stuff. That's why I'm reading it to you. Please do not underestimate the value of knowing these kinds of things. This is real occult knowledge. And other people have it too. Finding more information that's going to be useful here in this video. While you sat and thought about what I just said, or what was just said here. Selfish greed. Figure 28 gives us an example of selfish greed. Let it be noted that here there is nothing even so lofty as ambition. And it is also evident from the tinge of muddy green that the person from whom this unpleasant thought is projecting is quite ready to employ deceit in order to obtain her desire. While the ambition of figure 21 was general in its nature, the craving expressed in this figure 28 is for a particular object toward which it is reaching out. For it'll be understood that this thought form, like that back in figure 13, remains attached to the astral body, which must be supposed to be on the left of the picture. Claw-like forms of this nature are very frequently to be seen converging upon a woman who wears a new dress or bonnet or some specially attractive article of jewelry. The thought form may vary in color according to the precise amount of envy or jealousy which is mingled with the lust for possession, but an approximation to the shape indicated in our illustration will be found in all cases. Not infrequently, people gathered in front of a shop window may be seen thus protruding astral cravings through the glass. Excuse me. At his shipwreck, various emotions. Here's one: at a shipwreck. Very serious is the panic, which has occasioned the very interesting group of thought forms which are depicted in what we have here called thought figure number 30. They were seen simultaneously, arranged exactly as presented, though in the midst of indescribable confusion. So their relative positions have been retained, though in explaining them, it would be convenient to take them in reverse order. They were called forth by a terrible accident, and they are instructive as showing how differently people are affected by sudden and serious danger. One form shows nothing but an eruption of the livid gray of fear, rising out of a basis of utter selfishness, you see. And unfortunately, there were many such as this in the incident. The shattered appearance of the thought form shows the violence and completeness of the explosion, which in turn indicates that the whole soul of that person was possessed with blind, frantic terror, and that the overpowering sense of personal danger excluded for the time every higher feeling. Folks, this is exactly the kind of thing, this is exactly the kinds of thought forms, one kind of thought form that world controllers, the Illuminati, the war on consciousness freaks want us to be engaged in, producing, surrounding ourselves with. It's the truth. Consider the effect that these types of thought forms produced by you will then have on you in a feedback loop. Thought forms try to, especially when so vitalized. Remember, they take on a life of their own. And as such, they want to prolong that life. And they do what it takes to do that. More thoughts of the same kind help to do that. And thought forms do that. Very intense low vibrations. And thought forms that look like it. The second form in line here represents at least an attempt at self-control in the incident that was occurring, and shows the attitude adopted by a person having a certain amount of religious feeling. The thinker is seeking solace in prayer and endeavoring in this way to overcome her fear. Folks, there are incidences occurring right now, early in the year 2014, that are creating fear on the planet by the massive humanity, the massive humanity. Whether or not we are aware of it all the time, there is growing and lurking fear. We become adjusted to it. We're not aware of it. Now, we might see some YouTube video, sinkholes happening all over the place, great tsunamis, and, see stuff that really kind of like freaks us out because, it's a little overloading. And at moments, we may become conscious of fear And imagine, well, if some of this stuff is really going on, and it comes close to me, how am I going to feel? That's pretty scary, What we're much less aware of is a growing and lurking fear in the atmosphere. And now that you know more about that kind of what that word, the atmosphere, means, you'll know how true this is. Learning to protect oneself from such thought forms and learning to not create them, but create much, much higher vibration ones, and intentionally doing so is a pretty good idea. Now, you don't have to be on the road to true selfhood to be able to do that, right? I mean, you can create thought forms without, knowing that. I mean, intentionally create thought forms of your choosing, right? Without being on the road to true selfhood, without moving in that direction. Yeah, you can. But you're gonna be limited. You're gonna be limited. You can only produce what you have within you to produce. Only the substance of your own character is available to work with. It's a pretty good idea to get on the road, on the path toward true selfhood. That automatically then involves greater will focalization, more purity of thought, feeling, action. It all works together. It all works together. And yeah, you can be on that, moving in that direction and not know all this stuff. But it all works together. The more you know about what you're doing, the better it's going to work. The more knowledge you have to employ, pulling more things together all at once to throw into the effort, to put into the work. And the more you're going to have the ability to be discriminate in what you do and how you do it. For example, I've stated elsewhere in the book The Astral World, for example, I have interjected just like I'm doing right now. I have stated cautions against the engaging, participating in the trend that's going around to astral project, astral travel, astral projection into the astral plane. I've stated cautions about that. There are many reasons for it. And I know there will be people who will object to me having this, putting out that caution. I know that. Because they consider it to be just like driving to the supermarket. But if you have this knowledge, right? And you are making also, at the same time, you have this knowledge, just this, right here. And you are making a move towards self-realization, true selfhood. What do you need to astral project for? What's the point? What business do you have traveling around in your astral body in the astral plane? Like I've said elsewhere, you'll get your time there. Let it happen when it's going to happen, when it's supposed to happen. You know, like when you don't have a physical sheath to work with anymore. And what do you need it for? It's just a distraction. In almost every case, for almost every human being incarnate in physical form, doing this, doing that, astral projection into the astral plane is just a distraction from anything like a movement toward true selfhood or actual application of occult knowledge like this. And it can be hazardous, dangerous, obstructive to your progress and to your well-being. Not necessarily going to be, but things can happen, and you might not even be aware of them. You might have no clue what these things are that can happen, and you might not know when they happen. Then again, you might. It might show up later. So, this kind of knowledge helps you to be discriminate, as well as to know what to do, which directions to go, how to figure things out, how to notice things, how to employ certain things, how to bring them into your awareness, into your practice, and so forth. At the same time, like I'm pointing out, it helps us know what to stay away from. And what things that might have seemed necessary at first really aren't anymore. Anyway, here we go. We're talking about these thought forms that occurred at a shipwreck. A very striking contrast to the humiliating weakness shown in these forms is the splendid strength and decision of a third one. Here we have no amorphous mass with quivering lines and explosive fragments, but a powerful, clear-cut, and definite thought, obviously full of force and resolution. For this is the thought of the officer in charge, the man responsible for the lives and the safety of the passengers. And he rises to the emergency in a most satisfactory manner one can see. I'm looking at these images, and they're very, very well describing what's being shown here. Yep. It does not even occur to him to feel the least shadow of fear. You can see it in his thought form. He has no time for it. Though the scarlet of the sharp point is his weapon-like thought form, shows anger that the accident should have happened, the bold curve of orange immediately above it betokens perfect self-confidence and certainty of his power to deal with the difficulty. The brilliant yellow implies that his intellect is already at work on the problem, while the green, which runs side by side with it, denotes the sympathy which he feels for those whom he intends to save. A very striking and instructive group of thought forms there. Now they're describing at a street accident, at a funeral. Well, I am going to skip. Here's one, sympathy and love for all. Let's see what it says. Hitherto we have been chiefly dealing with forms that are the expression of emotion, or of such thought as is aroused within the mind by external circumstances. Now we can consider, we have now to consider some of those caused by thoughts which arise from within. Forms generated during, let's say, meditation, each being the effect produced by a conscious effort on the part of the thinker to form a certain conception or to put himself into a certain attitude. Naturally, such thoughts are definite. For the man who trains himself in this way learns how to think with clearness and precision. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. And the development of his power in this direction shows itself in the beauty and the regularity of the shapes produced. In this case, we have the result of an endeavor on the part of the thinker to put himself into an attitude of sympathy and love towards all mankind. And thus we have a series of graceful lines of the luminous green of sympathy with the strong roseate glow of affection shining out between them. Now, even though you're not seeing the images here, I want you to remember the colors and the general trends of the shapes of lines, forms that you hear in this video. Okay? You may have to go back and re-listen to this many times, but I'm giving you enough examples of these illustrations of actual thought forms. We talked about the colors, what they mean, and we're talking about general trends of formation and lines. Okay? Enough for you to get the idea that you can create these intentionally by thinking not just the thought content, but in your mental image, add in the colors, intentionally add them in. I mean, they're going to be produced anyway. Intentionally do it. I mean, go about it with the knowledge of what the heck's going on with your thought forms and intend that to happen. Intend that effect at the same time as you are thinking the thought that's creating the thought form. Do you get what I'm saying? Go about your thoughts with full knowledge of the thought form that goes with it. Become very aware of it. As aware of it as you are of the thought you are thinking. In fact, increase your awareness of it too. Make your thought forms. And be careful of what they are. Because once you enter into this kind of knowledge and practice, cause and effect becomes all that much more important to you. When you start throwing in intention, knowledge, and strong use of will. At this level of operation, you're working with very, very powerful tools. You are entering into the range of action and mentalism that requires you to have a pretty good understanding of cause and effect. Be careful of the thought forms you create. Not just as a general statement anymore. But if you're going about your thinking with your thought also involving the thought forms, their shapes and their colors and their lines that form them, and their activity after they've taken on their life of their own, and you have endowed them with vitality through desire force to do so, and the will to do so, and the mental image of the thought form that you're creating as part of its creation. Beware of what you do. Be careful. Be careful what you ask for. The lines are still sufficiently broad and wide apart to be easily drawn, but in some of the higher examples of thought forms of this type are lines so fine and so close that no human hand can represent them as they really are. The outline of this thought form is that of a leaf, actually, in shape, yet its shape and the curve of its lines are more suggestive of a certain kind of shell. So that this is another example of the approximation to forms seen in physical nature, which we noted earlier. Here's an example. Here's a thought form that a description of which is an aspiration to enfold all. Figure 38 in the book. We have a far more developed example of the same type. That's the last one. This form was generated by one who was trying, while sitting in meditation, to fill his mind with an aspiration to enfold all mankind in order to draw them upwards towards the high ideal which shone so clearly before his eyes. Therefore, it is that the form which he produces seems to rush out from him, to curve around upon itself, and to return to its base. Therefore, it is that the marvelously fine lines are drawn in lovely luminous violet. It's one of those spirograph-looking results. To curve around upon itself and to return to its base, therefore it is that the marvelously fine lines are drawn in lovely luminous violet, and that from within the form there shines out a glorious golden light, which it is unfortunately quite impossible to reproduce on paper in an illustration. For the truth is that all these apparently intricate lines are in reality only one line circling around and form again and again with unwearied patience and wonderful accuracy, just like the spirograph thing used to do, come to think of it. You put your pen in a hole that's on a wheel that engages by way of teeth in another wheel that you've pinned to a piece of paper, and you just move your pen through, and it goes round and round and round, and you keep your pen going, and you keep these two wheels' teeth locked together, and they're rolling around each other. Different size wheels, different shaped things, some were more oblong, some were round, smaller, bigger. You put them together, lock their teeth, and stick your pen in a hole that you choose at different locations, right? And you turn these wheels around each other, and your pen draws this design. And it's one continuous line. That's what's being described here. This kind of thing. It is scarcely possible that any human hand could make such a drawing as this on this scale. And in any case, the effect of its colors could not be shown, for it will be seen by experiment that if an attempt be made to draw violet lines close together upon a yellow background, a gray effect at once appears, and all likeness to the original then is destroyed. But what cannot be done by hand may sometimes be achieved by the superior accuracy and delicacy of a machine, and it is in this way that the drawing was made, from which our illustration is reproduced, with some attempt to represent the color effect as well as the wonderful delicacy of the lines and the curves. Now here's one called In the Six Directions. This form represented in figure 39 is the result of another endeavor to extend love and sympathy in all directions, an effort almost precisely similar to that which gave birth to figure 37, though the effect seems so different. The reasons for this variety and for the curious shape taken in this case constitute a very interesting illustration of the way in which thought forms grow. It would be seen that in this instance, the thinker displays considerable devotional feeling and has also made an intellectual effort to grasp the conditions necessary for the realization of his wishes. And the blue and yellow colors remain as evidence of this. This is an example in which somebody is coming pretty close to being quite aware of the process of his thoughts as he's thinking them, with intentions along the lines, to even coming close to having intentions along the lines of strengthening the result of this thought content by the use of knowledge of how some of this might be working. Now, I have alluded to that, but to a much greater extent, that's half the game. I've alluded to it many times now, not just here, but elsewhere, even more strongly. Originally, this thought form was circular, and the dominant idea evidently was that the green of sympathy should be upon the outside, facing in all directions, as it were, and that love should lie at the center and heart of the thought in directing its outgoing energies. But the maker of this thought form had been reading Hindu books, and his modes of thought had been greatly influenced by them. Students of Oriental literature will be aware that the Hindu speaks not of 4 directions, north, east, south, and west, as we do, but always of 6, since he very sensibly includes the zenith and the nadir, N-A-D-I-R. Our friend was imbued from his reading with the idea that he should pour forth his love and sympathy in the 6 directions. But since he did not accurately understand what the 6 directions are, he directed his stream of affection towards 6 equidistant points in his circle, which is evident in his thought form. The outrushing streams altered the shape of the outlying lines which he had already built up, and so instead of having a circle as a section of his thought form, we have this curious hexagon with its inward curving sides. We see thus how faithfully every thought form records the exact process of its upbuilding, registering ineffaceably even the errors of its construction. So, folks, you can build whatever thought forms you want. Here's one, figure 40, an intellectual conception of cosmic order. We have the effect of an attempt to attain an intellectual conception of cosmic order. The thinker was obviously a theosophist. And it will be seen that when he endeavors to think of the action of spirit upon matter, he instinctively follows the same line of symbolism as that depicted in the well-known seal of the Theosophical Society. Here we have an upward-pointing triangle, signifying the threefold aspect of the spirit, interlaced with the downward-pointing triangle, which indicates matter with its 3 inherent qualities. Usually we represent the upward triangle in white or gold, and the downward pointing one in some darker hue such as blue or black. But it is noteworthy that in this case the thinker is so entirely occupied with the intellectual endeavor that no color but yellow is exhibited within the form. There's no room as yet for emotions of devotion, of wonder, or of admiration. The idea which he wishes to realize fills his mind entirely. Just the idea of it fills his mind entirely, as you can tell by the yellow color, to the exclusion of all else. Still, the definiteness of the outline as it stands out against its background of rays shows that he has achieved a high measure of success. The definiteness. Now, moving forward a little bit, the logos as manifested in man. We're now coming to a series of thoughts which are among the very highest the human mind can form when in meditation upon the divine source of its being. When the man in reverent contemplation tries to raise his thought toward the logos of our solar system, he naturally makes no attempt to image himself as that august being, nor does he think of him as in any way possessing such form as we can comprehend. Nevertheless, such thoughts build forms for themselves in the matter of the mental plane, and it will be of interest for us to examine those forms. In our illustration, figure 41, we have a thought of the logos as manifested in man, with the devotional aspiration that he may thus be manifest through the thinker. It is this devotional feeling which gives the pale blue tinge to the five-pointed star. And its shape is significant, since it has been employed for many ages as a symbol of God manifest in man. Curiously enough, the thinker may perhaps have been a Freemason. And his knowledge of the symbolism employed by that body may have had its share in the shaping of the star. Excuse me. It will be seen that the star is surrounded by bright yellow rays shining out amidst a cloud of glory, which denotes not only the reverential understanding of the surpassing glory of the deity involved in the thought, but also a distinct intellectual effort in addition to the outpouring of devotion in that direction. Now, our next three figures are devoted to the effort to represent a thought of a very high type and endeavor to think of the logos as pervading all nature. Here again, it's impossible to give a full reproduction, and we must call upon our readers for an effort of the imagination which shall to some extent supplement the deficiencies of the arts of drawing and printing. The golden ball depicted in figure 42 must be thought of as inside the other ball of delicate lines that are blue in color, which is drawn in figure 44. Golden ball inside the other ball of delicate lines that are blue. Delicate blue lines. Any effort to place the colors in such intimate juxtaposition on the physical plane results simply in producing a green blur, so that the whole character of the thought form is lost. It is only by means of the machine before mentioned that it is at all possible to represent the grace and the delicacy of the lines. As before, a single line produces all the wonderful tracery, and the effect of the four radiating lines making a sort of cross of light is merely due to the fact that the curves are not really concentric, although at first sight they may appear to be so. That gives an idea of what kinds of shapes and colors are involved in very high thoughts. I'll give another one called here the sevenfold manifestation. In all religions, there remains some tradition of the great truth that the Logos manifests himself, so to speak, through 7 mighty channels, often regarded as the minor logoi, or great planetary spirits. In the Christian scheme, they appear as the 7 great archangels, sometimes called the 7 spirits before the throne of God. In any case, the figure numbered 47 shows the result of the effort to meditate upon this method of divine manifestation. We have the golden glow in the center, and also, though with lesser splendor, pervading the form. The line is blue, and it draws a succession of 7 graceful and almost feather-like double wings which surround the central glory and are clearly intended as a part of it. As the thought strengthens and expands, these beautiful wings change their color to violet and become like the petals of a flower and overlap one another in an intricate but exceedingly effective pattern. This gives us a very interesting glimpse into the formation and the growth of these shapes in higher matter. I hope that by now you are getting the idea that so many things that are referred to in other ways have root or connection with, or root in, or are identical with, any of those things there, thought forms. I hope you're getting a really clear picture or idea or understanding, conception of their importance to know about, their power, their meaning, their reality, and so forth. Let's see what else we have. Surely the study of these thought forms should be a most impressive lesson, since from it we may see both what to avoid and what to cultivate. And we may learn by degrees to appreciate how tremendous is our responsibility for the exercise of this mighty power. Indeed, it is terribly true, as we said in the beginning, that thoughts are things, poisoned things. And it behooves us to remember that every one of us is generating them unceasingly, night and day. See how great is the happiness this knowledge brings to us, and how gloriously we can utilize it when we know of someone in sorrow or in suffering. Often circumstances arise which prevent us from giving physical help either by word or deed, however much we may desire to do so, but there is no case in which help by thought may not be given. And no case in which it can fail to produce a definite result. It may often happen that at the moment our friend may be too entirely occupied with his own suffering, or perhaps too much excited to receive and accept any suggestion from without. But presently a time comes when our thought form can penetrate and then discharge itself. And then assuredly our sympathy will produce its due result. It is indeed true that the responsibility of using such a power is great. Yet we should not shrink from our duty on that account. It is sadly true that there are many men who are unconsciously using their thought power chiefly for evil. Yet this only makes it all the more necessary that those of us who are beginning to understand life a little should use it consciously and use it for good. We have at our command a never-failing criterion. We can never misuse this mighty power of thought if we employ it always in unison with the great divine scheme of evolution. And for the uplifting of our fellow man. The figures in this book, numbered 48 to 54, were the results of a systematic attempt to send helpful thought by the friend who has furnished us with the sketches. A definite time was given each day at a fixed hour. The forms were in some cases seen by the transmitter, but in all cases were perceived by the recipient, who immediately sent rough sketches of what was seen by the next post to the transmitter, who has kindly supplied the following notes with regard to them. Quote, in the colored drawings appended, the blue features appear to have represented the more devotional element of the thought. The yellow forms accompanied the endeavor to communicate intellectual fortitude or mental strength and courage. The rosy pink appeared when the thought was blended with affectionate sympathy. If the sender could formulate his thoughts deliberately at the appointed time, the receiver would report seeing a large clear form. The latter persisted for some minutes, constantly streaming its luminous yellow message upon the recipient. If, however, the sender, the transmitter, was of necessity experimenting under difficulty, say walking outside or through a door of some difficulty, he would occasionally see his forms broken up into smaller globes or shapes. And the receiver would report their receipt, so broken up. In this way, many details could be checked and compared as from opposite ends of the line, so to speak, and the nature of the influence communicated offered another means of verification. There's a final section in this book called Forms Built by Music. This video has now run on at some length, and I have to make a decision right now. Perhaps I will wait for another time to talk about thought forms built by music, as that can be considered a subject a bit different than the one that's been the general trend here. My goal has been accomplished with the material already presented. Perhaps along the lines of interest in music, later in another video, I will address thought forms created by music. And so, this video is concluded. 3 hours, 13 minutes, and 29, 30 seconds. Be well. Be well.